All right. Welcome everyone to the Hawaii Aquaculture Tech and Research Brown Bag, sponsored by NELHA and the Hawaii Aquaculture Collaborative, which is facilitated by the University of Hawaii Sea Grant College Program. A little bit of housekeeping. The recording of today's session and slides will be posted on our website, hiaquacollab.org. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and use the hand raising feature, or just simply go ahead and speak up when you have a question or want to make a comment during our discussion. This is the Technology and Research Working Group of the Hawaii Aquaculture Collaborative. We're here to provide a space for Hawaii aquaculture industry leaders and stakeholders to collaborate on tech and research solutions. Our format is about 10 to 15 minutes of background and a problem that an industry leader is trying to solve, and the rest of the time will be for questions, discussions, and possible solutions. Our schedule is every second Wednesday of each month at noon. If you have a tech and research problem you'd like to solve, please contact Kai. And for more info, see our website. Just to let you know what's coming up next month, Sita Ekaputri, a PhD candidate at UH, has been working with CTSA on an economic feasibility assessment of a local feed mill for aquaculture. So please join us on December 14th for that session. And now let's get to our main event. We'd like to welcome Tori Spence McConnell. She is the Regional Aquaculture Coordinator for NOAA's Pacific Islands Regional Office. When I first met Tori, I asked about her role, and she said that she is the cheerleader for all things aquaculture in the Pacific region. And she's here today to talk about what's next for aquaculture permitting in federal waters. So without further ado, aloha and welcome, Tori.
Mahalo, Gina. I forgot that's how I sometimes describe it. Yes, I'm Tori, and I work for NOAA's Pacific Islands Regional Office. And I haven't described myself as the aquaculture cheerleader because I'm the only person in my office focused on it 100% of the time. So it is kind of a funny thing to say, I suppose, but I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to try and share my screen here. Let's see if I can, just share a tab. And
okay, we can see it, but there, we can hear you also now.
Yeah, Zoom is a whole new world for me. We work only in Google Meets, and sometimes using Zoom in the web version, it's a little funky, but appreciate everyone bearing with me through that. So yeah, just let me know if I would say probably interject if something is going wrong where you can't hear me, or if there's something wrong with the slides, because I'm only working from a laptop here too. But yeah, so I mostly wanted to talk to y'all today, give you an update on kind of what's happening with regulatory management of aquaculture in federal waters. So this would be 300 to 200 nautical miles offshore, roughly, depending on where you're talking. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion because I would like to hear more from everyone here about, how we can best understand and ensure all your voices are heard as part of this process. So I'll jump over to the slides now. Quick agenda for this conversation today. I'm going to give you a little overview of offshore aquaculture management as it stands. Going to talk a little bit about some of the next steps, but I'd really like to spend a lot of time on any questions and discussion that come up. So hopefully this presentation doesn't take too much of the overall time here. So quick overview on offshore aquaculture. Again, as I mentioned, for our NOAA region, the Pacific Islands Regional Office, the Pacific Islands region encompasses more than just the main Hawaiian Islands. You'll see anything in this kind of blue shaded area is all federal waters surrounding islands or archipelagos in the Pacific Islands region. And so generally we say it's, when we're talking about permitting offshore aquaculture in federal waters in our region, we say generally 300 to 200 nautical miles offshore. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule because that all depends on where we draw the state territorial lines between state or territorial and federal waters. So that could vary depending on your location. But generally, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And currently, you may have heard this before. And first of all, thank you to OI for letting me take a picture of the very grumpy grouper here. I love using this picture because it's really cute. But you don't actually need a permit from NOAA Fisheries if you're going to be doing most kinds of aquaculture in federal waters. Now, that may be news to some of you, it may not be, but that is something that was identified a few years ago at the council and in some of the pilot testing and various aquaculture operations that have looked into setting up in federal waters here. Basically, it's kind of confusing how it works, but the way that it works within our fishing regulations is if you're raising a management unit species, like one of the main species, you don't need a permit to catch that fish or to harvest that fish, I should say, if you are, as long as the gear you're using isn't prohibited. And right now, there's no aquaculture gear that's prohibited. So that's why we say you kind of don't need a permit from NMFS, the National Marine Fisheries Service, also known colloquially as NOAA Fisheries, in order to have an aquaculture operation. But then on top of that, there are a lot of other agencies that do require a permit, and it can be kind of confusing to work through that patchwork of other permits. You know, there's also plenty of timelines and requirements that may not always add up, and there's just not a real streamlined or kind of coordinated effort right now, at least in our region, to make sure that all happens, that everyone's talking to each other from early on. So that is why the Fisheries Management Council, you may know them as WestPAC, the Western Pacific Fisheries Management Council, they first recommended developing an aquaculture program in 2009, I believe, and kind of looking through the history and scoping for this entire project, we NOAA Fisheries works hand in hand with the council to develop and implement regulation. And we are at the phase now where we're at this orange box. We've finalized the programmatic environmental impact statement, which is something you may have heard me talk about at some point in the past 2 years or so. That's kind of when we've been working through that. It went out for public comment last year in the summer, and then we've published a final version of it in early September this year. And so at this point, we've done an environmental analysis on a very broad, high level, I should say, kind of a baseline environmental analysis to set the stage for developing a permitting program. And now the council is working on kind of their end of this, which is what's called a fishery ecosystem plan, or an FEP amendment. So they need to amend some of their rules in order to allow aquaculture to be considered as its own thing under these regulations. I'm sorry, under their rules. Then it bounces back to NOAA. We're going to work on developing regulation. And ultimately, we would like to end up at the end point here, the dark blue square arrow. And that would be at a fully functioning management program developed with the council. Might need more environmental analysis. It absolutely will have more public input. And that's kind of the phase I'd like to talk a little bit more about today, because we're in this kind of second to last phase here, this blue zone, the medium dark blue, cobalt, if you will, the FEP amendments. That's kind of where we're working now. But there's a lot of room for consultation, for conversation. There's a lot of work that needs to be done even in this phase that I'd like to make sure that we can kind of keep everyone on the same page. So this programmatic environmental impact statement, or PEIS, that's the environmental analysis I mentioned. The main goal of it was really just identify what are those elements of a management program, and how could it be streamlined, at least from a NMFS or from a NOAA Fisheries perspective. And then ultimately that does provide the foundational environmental and socioeconomic. In my mind, socioeconomic is part of the environment. That is part of the legal definition too. But it kind of is this baseline analysis for even being able to set up a program. And then hopefully, if that program is developed, then further analyses that might have to happen at a site level could kind of tier from that, something called tiering, where you can use that baseline and then add in additional things that are specific to your sites. So these are kind of the main features we're looking at for a coordinated management program. It would be comprehensive and it would be coordinated with, we're trying to do like a one-stop shop kind of thing. That's what people like to say. But basically, we want to make sure that we are working with all the other agencies that also have permitting authority to make sure everyone's on the same page, to make sure we meet up early, and that all of the requirements, that there aren't duplicate requirements and that they are not conflicting requirements. So the things that we considered in this EIS and that you'll see in the FEP amendment and any probably draft future management program are going to be these things on the page here. It's going to require, it's going to outline all the permit eligibility, how that works, transfer, that's going to align with our fishing regulations if you're familiar with those. Commercial permit, there's going to be kind of two main permits, the commercial and the research permit. We're still working out the details on what a dealer permit would be. And then there will be some sort of a program capacity limitation, but that has not been defined. And that's something we want to make sure that if we do define it, it's something that makes sense, that we're not just kind of putting numbers on a page in an assumption of what a capacity could be. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure that it's kind of an area-based management goal, that we're taking everything into account. And then for allowable species and allowable systems, that's actually going to be pretty broad. So it's going to be, as long as it's native to the area where you want to raise it, then it's an allowable species. And then systems and technologies, we haven't listed any restrictions on systems. So in theory, as long as you can do an environmental analysis and all the other necessary analyses and permits for your proposed system, then we wouldn't really be barring it. And so next steps, like I mentioned, we really just want to hear from you. So I pulled up this little timeline again to remind you where we're at. But on the whole, I'd really like to know either now or in the future how we can best engage with all y'all and anyone else in the periphery in this community, because we really can't build this stuff without actually taking into account the reality, I guess is the way to put it. So, you know, I just kind of put some questions up here for thought for today. If there's anything in your mind that you've had a really great experience or a really awful experience with in other permitting management situations, maybe in a different state or here, I would definitely be interested to hear about that. If there's something that you think would be really cool, even just kind of blue sky, like we'd love to see this thing that hasn't ever happened yet. I'd love to hear about that too. And again, I want to encourage you to take part in any of the formal public comment that happens. There will be more on the horizon for sure when the FEP amendment is drafted and published. That's going to go out for a public review period. And then also when the regulations are drafted and published. So again, lots more opportunity for like the more formal public comment. But I do hope that you can keep my email handy if you have any questions or thoughts too coming out of this. So yeah, why don't we move into like questions and thoughts, if there are any, about what more management could mean for offshore aquaculture, or anything that you'd like me to consider or you'd like Noah to consider as we're moving forward with this in consultation with the council.
Thanks so much, Tori. All right, let's turn it to our stakeholders on Zoom now and see what kind of questions you might have for Tori, or as she says, you know, what would you like to see or not see in a management program?
Or also if there are questions about the program that we've discussed today, that's cool too.
It looks like there's a question from Noha.
So hi, Tori, this is Neil. Thank you very much for the presentation. And you knew I wasn't going to let you get away without it. question or two or three.
I'm expecting it.
So I'm really interested to see the different framing of the research permit there. This is something that as you're aware of, I've been advocating at every open podium for this sort of a separate research permit. And just for everybody else's background, there's been an abundance of research that's shown that so long as you're working with a native species and you're not over any sensitive bottom, you're not putting your net pin over the top of a coral reef or something else that would be sensitive. So long as you're out over sand or deep water and you've got native species, there's pretty much nothing that you can do that will really screw things up permanently. That anything that you do, any perturbation from your research project, if you pull the net pen out within 6 to 12 months, generally it reverts to its pristine state. And so there's very little risk in providing research permits for small scale projects. But as you're aware, Tori, it's been an arduous process for even getting permits to put a couple of thousand fish out in water that's 12,000 feet deep. So is there some thinking there in NOAA about how there might be a shorter timeline for research permits? Our Villela permits for each of them, that was the Drifter Cage project, took 2 years each time for that. And we almost lost our National Science Foundation funding for that project because we couldn't get the permits in time. And that's going to be a recurring problem. I think Hatch sees that issue here as well when they have members of their cohorts that want to go and do research, and the Hatch cohort runs for 6 months and they know that they wouldn't be able to get the permits to do it in time. So is there an opportunity here for a quick review and a quick turnaround on a research permit, given that the risks are really minimal, or would you expect to get sued anyway?
Expect to get sued anyway. I feel like that's just a fact of life, Neil. Well, let's put it this way. The sky is open as far as what it would take to exactly get a research permit versus a commercial right now. That's the phase that we're at. We're drafting those regulations and drafting those FEP amendments. And I don't see why we couldn't consider finding a way to have more of a risk analysis embedded in that research permit, knowing that it's a shorter duration and knowing that the research itself likely would be a shorter duration in the water. Because I hear you, that's kind of what needs to happen. If you're going to be able to test things out, you need to be able to test it out in a reasonable time frame and not potentially lose your other funding sources that are tied to that. So if you don't mind, I would ask if you or anyone here, if you know of any good papers, risk analyses, anything like that, send them our way. That's stuff that we can work into, kind of the research surrounding and justification for developing all of the specific parameters around what these permits are. But I personally would not want that to take you 2 years. Another thing that can also help reduce that is by developing this more kind of coordinated management system. We are like formally setting it up. It's not going to be a one-off every time. So at least on our end, people will know what to expect. They'll have SOPs, we'll have it figured out how to do it for aquaculture research permits. And that alone can really help speed up a lot of the timeline there too. So I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for, but definitely anything that comes your way that you think could be helpful in that justification or helpful for understanding what the risk may or may not be. We point to data. That's all we do is we point to data, we point to research and say, hey, based on this is the justification for allowing a quicker turnaround on that application period. And that's something that we can talk with our the other agencies at the table too, so that it's not just one agency holding something up too. Because I think there's a lot of room for being more efficient within ourselves and amongst ourselves, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. No, thank you very much, Tori. And to be clear, that 2 year period involved us having to do our Oh, actually, NOAA did it for us. You compiled the environmental assessment there for those Varela projects. But so here, because you will have the air cover of the programmatic EIS, would an individual research project need to go and do an EA, or is that still undefined? That's what you're thinking about in this management plan. What would
That's
be
still undefined. Oh, sorry, I didn't interrupt. Go ahead.
No, sorry, I was done. I was just still muttering.
Okay, it's still undefined, but that's kind of the rationale. So the way that the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, works is you build a large, at least in the way that we're working with it here, you build a large kind of high level analysis, in our case of the entire region, which is huge. But you have that then to tier from, and then we may not fully define in the regulations that for sure it will be an EA or a supplemental EA or a supplemental EIS. Like there are different types of tiering that can happen. That might have to be up to the specific project itself, depending on the site chosen. Probably would be the primary factor in changing that. But that is the general idea, is like, okay, if we've got this programmatic EIS, then that helps lay the groundwork for the regulation to be there. And then anyone who would theoretically apply to a permit under that future regulation that doesn't exist yet, then they already have that EIS to draw from, and their environmental analysis, if anything else needs to happen, that's going to be determined then. But the underlying theory and the whole point of doing the programmatic was to be able to help cover a vast majority of what would be out there, so that it would take a lot of the burden off of everyone from having to write and rewrite the same kind of analyses over and over for every single site now, or for every single applicant.
Thanks, Neil. I think Crystal has a question too.
Hey, Tori. So can you get a little bit into what agencies that NOAA is working with currently around this? Like, are you guys working with DLNR and Plant and Quarantine?
Right now, we're not working directly with many of the state agencies on this particular thing, but we're going to soon. Plant and Quarantine, we have not gotten in contact with at the moment, mostly because theoretically, if we're allowing only native species, then you know what, that's a good point. I'm thinking about it as I'm talking here, but you could be importing stock, even if it's a native species, it might be from outside of your island chain. So that might be different. But I'm mostly working right now at the federal level. So with Army Corps of Engineers and EPA, those are kind of the two biggies. And of course, the Coast Guard is another one that usually has some sort of oversight or say in farm operations too. Those conversations are a bit further down the road. So far, they know what we're doing and what they'd like to be at the table for. But as far as like exactly what that means right now, I'm not sure. We're kind of moving into that phase of where we get to talk nuts and bolts and see what we can figure out for working better together. But I am cool. I don't know if Todd's on at all, but I try and keep in touch with Todd Lowe a lot. I know he's in
the Department of Ag. Yeah, yeah,
but
that's a big one too.
But yeah, he's kind of my connection to the state right now. And then as we move further into getting the nuts and bolts figured out, we're gonna have to figure out, like his dealer permits is actually one that we're still kind of figuring out, because that usually on the fishing side of things goes to the state or territory dealer permit. So there's gonna have to be a lot of coordination too, because you can't be offshore. Well, I guess you can, but it'd be pretty hard to be offshore without having some sort of an onshore presence. So
right.
Working with states and territories is part of that.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
forwarding it over to this slide here. Hopefully you can still see, but definitely take note of my email. I see we have another question in at NELHA.
Hi, Tori, Laurence from NELHA here. So a quick question on the management plan, the vision of the management plan. Is that a one-stop shop to help facilitate the whole process as far as permitting? Or is it more regulatory? Could you speak a little bit about sort of the driving vision for that management plan?
Yeah, sure. Are you referring to the very last arrow in that timeline? Because we have fishery ecosystem plans, and that's something managed by the council, and then the regulations in conjunction with that, with the fishery ecosystem plan, will be like a permitting program. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, your end goal on your timeline, you had a management plan there. So, you know, is the idea so that people would, like I said, a one-stop shop, that you would assist, NOAA would assist to obtain all the other permits that are involved with an aquaculture farm offshore? Is that the main goal of that part of the management plan?
Yeah, that is. It's essentially NOAA saying, hey, all of these different agencies have some sort of a touch on permitting offshore aquaculture, and we're happy to be the ones to like convene everyone. So it would be theoretically, you could come to NOAA with your application or your pre-application, and then we can start getting all of the agencies on board, having meetings to discuss, you know, what you're looking at and what you might be looking at as far as like what those agencies would require based on your proposal as it stands right now, that kind of a thing. And then obviously moving all the way down the line through the permitting process itself. And part of that too is kind of like what I mentioned before about kind of streamlining and being more efficient with the way that we work together and our permitting processes, and making sure that you know, we're not requiring the same thing, but in two slightly different ways, like from one agency to the other. Or like if somebody does an environmental analysis, that it includes everything that any other agency might need in it, so you don't have to go and produce several different versions of it.
Will not have to go to any of the other agencies. It'll just go to this one NOAA agency, fill up a single form or a group of forms, and then be done. Is that the idea?
That would be great. Yeah, that's the goal. So that you don't have to go chase down every single agency. Yeah. And then those other agencies, once we know that the applicant has submitted this application or a pre-application, then we would call in the other agencies, and then you would have contact with those other agencies, but you wouldn't necessarily have to do as many individual follow-ups at each one. You could do it all through NOAA. Obviously, we can't issue somebody else's permit, but if we can help facilitate the process, that's the goal.
There's nobody else.
I've got one. This is Robert Bakey with Forever Oceans. In your slides, you showed the commercial permit and a research permit, and the one limitation you had listed there was up to 20 on the commercial and up to 10 years on the research. The research permits, would there be other, is it likely there'll be other either capacity in terms of volume or capacity in terms of biomass limitations, or is it mostly, is the intention to predominantly be a limitation on timeline?
Right now, we're considering really only limiting the timeline of the permit itself. So yeah, it could be up to 10 years. And both of those, we wanted to make sure it's clear. Up to means as long as you're fulfilling the requirements as we go, which again, those are the nuts and bolts I'm talking about. And program capacity, that's really more applying to the commercial permit. We imagine that that would be the more potentially impactful area. But again, like I mentioned, we haven't fully fleshed out what exactly program capacity could mean. And we just don't want to put anything on there that would just be unreasonable without any backing to it. So so all of these terms and all of the specifics of how to go about that are still up in the air, I would say. And under consideration maybe is a better term. And so we're totally open to any thoughts or ideas or any concerns you might have. You know, if there are any other like limitations within a research permit that you could foresee would be difficult, then I'd definitely like to know about it.
I think Senator Wakai has a question.
Thank you, Kai. Hi, Tori. I am in the State Senate. I oversee energy, economic development, and tourism. I have really no background in aquaculture, so I feel like a fish out of water in this group. So forgive me if my questions are very rudimentary. And I apologize, I missed the beginning of your presentation, so I'm not too sure if you went over this, but you know, with the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, I know that there's a ban on commercial fishing activity, but is there also a ban on any kind of aquacultural activities, offshore aquaculture in that area?
That's a really good question. And right now, the way that we've defined it in our programmatic EIS and probably how it's going to be defined and when you see the draft regulations come out is we're really just trying to align with the fishing regulations as much as possible. So if fishing is banned, then aquaculture would be considered a form of that and would also be banned. So theoretically, we're not trying to make aquaculture. Aquaculture is its own special thing, and it's obviously very close, near dear to my heart. But it's kind of in the eyes of how the permitting will work. We want to make sure that any of the eligibility requirements, any of the siting allowances and that sort of a thing take into account the fishing regulations as well. And so, yeah, right now it would, if it's banned there, then aquaculture, if fishing is banned there, aquaculture would also be banned there. Does that answer your question?
No, it answers my question. It opens up
Okay.
the opportunity for us to have a discussion with our congressional folks, whether we want to have aquaculture defined as something different from commercial wild caught fishing, but that might be for a later conversation. What I think Hawaii needs to do, and in conjunction with the feds, is mapping out where aquaculture can and cannot take place, because I mean, I see NELHA as probably the go-to place initially to get this discussion started, but after that, where on Kauai, where around Maui and Oahu can aquaculture take place or not take place? You know, I mentioned I also take care of energy, and in our discussions about offshore wind and what the possibilities are there, it's not just where the wind tunnels are, but where does the Navy have submarines, and where do other factors come in as to where we could possibly put platforms for energy. So I would think the same issues would come into play on the federal side as the state and perhaps the feds map out where aquaculture, offshore aquaculture, can and cannot take place. So is that going to be part of your study as well?
Yeah, that's actually a huge part of it. So I can't say that we're going to go through each island area and identify those locations straight off the bat. That is something that is a goal of NOAA's. I'm going to put a link in the chat here to one resource that is pretty easily usable. It's publicly available mapping resources that you can do kind of a rough analysis of what types of ocean users are in the water there. The data for Hawaii is not as, at least in this mapping portal, it's not as detailed as it might be for other areas, but you can kind of get a rough idea. It's a really good place to start for your siting analysis for where you're looking. And then the other thing that NOAA does have as a, let me just, another thing that NOAA does have as a project and as a priority is this thing called aquaculture opportunity areas. And those are basically what you're talking about. It's identifying areas of the ocean where aquaculture could potentially take place. And this whole project to identify those involves a lot of stakeholder effort, a lot of work with a whole bunch of different agencies. It's not happening in our region right now, but it is happening in the Gulf of Mexico and in Southern California. So at this website, you can also learn a little more about that, that process, and then kind of where they're at with it. But they're developing their own programmatic environmental impact statements for these ocean areas that were identified. And the mapping, kind of going back to that first link that I sent with the map, the organization that produces that map is another kind of arm of NOAA. And they have really close ties with the military to make sure that they can get all of that necessary information as well. So they have a lot of access to a lot of data for mapping those things out. These are the kinds of resources that we would expect people would use either when they're applying for a permit, or that we will continue to use as we're further refining our regulation and the ecosystem management plans.
Okay, I'll look through those links. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Kai.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I think Tyler has a question now. I think you're muted, Tyler.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
I can see you
great.
too.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so Tori, just wondering, kind of in the environmental assessment that the program's working on right now, if they're taking into account kind of the just changes to the ocean that are happening from anthropogenic resources. I mean, coastal runoff, global warming, obviously are going to make some changes. And baselining numeric values is going to be difficult in the permitting process over the next 10 to 20 years of, exactly what kind of influence, positive or negative, offshore aquaculture would have. So in the new permitting process, and with the stakeholders you're working with, is there how are you looking at that assessment? Are you looking at a percent change to baseline or best practices, or still looking at changes to numeric values that are set in stone now?
That's also a really good question. And it is, to be honest, way more specific than our analysis is so far. I'm going to put one more link in the chat, and I think Jean might have included this link in the email. But that will take you to the programmatic environmental impact statement, the very high level analysis. It does incorporate climate change, but it's on a very, again, it's a very rough analysis. So I think it more accurately identifies the potential factors in climate change that may affect aquaculture, and whatever limited knowledge that we have about aquaculture that may affect some of the other factors in conjunction with those. So as far as like specific percent changes or numbers or anything like that, we have not defined that. I don't imagine that the regulations will be that specific, because we understand that climate change and all of those factors are evolving, and understanding a baseline and shifting baselines too is something that really needs to be taken into consideration. So I would say, if anything, that would be more on a site-specific basis, and it would probably be prioritized to whatever climate change factors are the top concerns or risks for that specific site, so that it doesn't go through unnecessary analysis.
Great, thanks.
Thanks. We have a question from Alex.
Yeah, hi, Tori. This is Alex Leonard. I'm with NELHA. I definitely applaud the concept here, and I understand that, right now, probably the best that we can hope for in terms of blanket coverage is that NOAA acts as the carrier, the mailman that drops off at the various other regulatory agencies that have jurisdiction in a given case. And I believe that will add some efficiency to the process. I also suggest that, obviously, the EIS that you're talking about cannot cover all situations and all conceivable projects, locations, species, methodologies, etc. A lot of that is going to come down to case-by-case review, as it does right now. And that case-by-case review often entails a significant review of policy and of regulation. What I suggest is the possibility that we try to streamline, kind of bootstrap for these reviews by archiving, by formalizing the outcomes of the early reviews, so that people don't have to start all over again from scratch when an AHJ, an authority having jurisdiction, receives a permit application or an EA, draft EA. They can go back through a record, a history of prior applications and review processes, so that they can be consistent and don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm just suggesting you might want to actually put that mechanism, build that mechanism, or that intent anyway, into the current EIS as a means of, like I say, streamlining the process. Did that make sense? Did that make any sense? I think Tori froze.
Yeah, she looks like she's frozen.
Tori, are you there with us? Oh, shucks. Okay, goodness. Well, let's see. We are over time, and let's see if Corey comes back in a couple of minutes. But I just want to thank you all for your attention today, as well as your comments. Oh, here comes Tori. Hey, Tori.
Hey, my internet went out in the middle of your
Good timing.
comment, Alex. Okay, the last thing I got was you would suggest that we streamline and bootstrap reviews by formalizing outcomes and archiving previous analyses. Would you be willing to pick up from there?
Yeah, so basically I was just suggesting that you might want to actually build this concept into the current EIS, so that agencies that are reviewing the current EIS are going to be ready for your guidance on how to implement this record keeping, this history of the review process, so that because I mean there's changes of administration and personnel and all this kind of stuff that you want to kind of remove all that from the process in order to streamline. And so I'm just suggesting that maybe you might want to think about how to document the history of reviews so as to make it easier, bootstrap future projects down the line.
That's a great comment. Thank you. I was obviously frantically taking notes, and thankfully took good enough notes that I could tell you where to look up. I also wanted to let y'all know that we do have a page that will hopefully be on our website soon. That is kind of just this overview of like what it's like to get permitting for aquaculture in federal waters here. So it has links to all the relevant agencies. And that actually is the location where I'm hoping in the future we could have things like repositories of EAs or EISs from previous projects. So because a lot of those, they are public, the EAs and EISs are public, but you kind of have to search for all of them. So one thing I would like to do, and hopefully this speaks a little bit to your comment, is to have a place where it's easy to find these other examples of things that have been done, so that no one has to start from scratch from the drawing board. And then I also hear you in ensuring that's written into any of our next steps in the regulation and the FEPs, wherever possible, making it clear that using existing information and ensuring that we're working from permits that we've issued before, essentially. That's what we do right now, but kind of like I was mentioning with Neil, it's like can be kind of a one-off because each one is so unique. And so that's exactly what we'd like to build, a library of resources, as annoying or boring as it might sound, but standard operating procedures, making sure we're doing it the way we've all agreed to do it, and way we've done it before that works well, and making sure those are living documents that can be updated as we go. And hopefully that will help with some of the institutional memory too, regardless of leadership changes or even personnel changes. So thank you for your comment.
Yeah, thank you. That addresses it.
If I may, this is Neil again in Nelha. Jean, I know we're over time, but if I may just put one more question to Tori, and thank you very much, Lex. That was a good question to springboard on this, because I think the whole idea of the aquaculture opportunity areas is that you would have then more pro forma for permit application, and as Senator Wakai was saying, for almost pre-permitting for some areas. Where are we at with that cycle? When does the opportunity open up for Hawaii to put their hand up and say, yes, we want to have an aquaculture opportunity area here, because we don't want to miss that cycle next go around. We missed out to California and Florida this last go around, so we don't want that to happen again. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a project that had a lot of steam behind it when the executive order for seafood came out. That was in May of 2020. And so we kind of just jumped right on the bat developing that. And you're right, yeah, Gulf of Mexico and Southern California got to be kind of the first with that. There has been, I have to look, I think there's been 2 rounds of like public listening sessions for people to, as you say, raise your hand and say, hey, we want to have that here. But frankly, any chance you get to, you know, put that in writing towards me or towards NOAA administrators, that's, you know, we are down to hear that anytime. So having that conversation will be pretty crucial, I think, to make it clear, because part of the calculus for that, which I will say, I'm actually not part of the group that makes the decision on it, but I am part of the group that can offer information about my region and say, yeah, there are people who are really interested in it here, and this is why. And so again, kind of like having data to point to, having an email to point to, that kind of a thing could really help. That. And I think in the meantime too, there's a lot of opportunity for hopefully developing some of the similar aspects to or parts of what we're deeming the aquaculture opportunity area. I think there's a lot of opportunity for developing some of those things outside of that more formal opportunity area process. And one of those is working with NCOS, the group that developed ocean reports, the link I put in earlier. They have a lot of resources at their disposal, a lot of access to a lot of data. And I know that every year they put money aside to help with regional like mapping kinds of priorities. So if there's anything we can help with here, I'm sure that they'd be available to do it. They've already offered to help NELHA if they're interested in you know, doing more ocean mapping around some of the offshore demonstration area. And that's something that, you know, that conversation is continuing, and, you know, we're going to make sure they can help however they can. So I guess kind of the short answer is let us know whenever you like and often. And if there's a way that I can help route that more towards headquarters so that we make sure they see it, I'm happy to do it. That's a lot of my job. And then in the meantime, if there are needs, even smaller needs in this specific area in the shorter term, especially if it's something that could help, you know, this other, you know, the longer term goal of having kind of better mapping resources out there, then that's something we can help with too. And just let us know, and we can get those conversations going and see if it might be something we could put on the table for NCOS, the group that makes that the mapping software.
Thank you very much, Tori. Appreciate that greatly.
All right. Yes, mahalo, Tori. And thank you all for the rich discussion. I think there are quite a few action items in here. Tori, did you get what you needed from this session? And can you kind of, you know, I heard from you, you know, tell me now, tell me often, tell me what you need. Is there anything else you'd like us to walk away with this session with?
I'll put my email in the chat, but yeah, feel free to bug me anytime. I love talking about this stuff, and I want to hear what your challenges are. I want to hear what you're thinking could be a really good idea for the future, because I'm just one person, but hopefully with all of us together, we can build something that actually is is useful. So let me know if stuff is not useful and let me know when it is. And yeah, just keep bringing your thoughts and ideas to me. And if there's any other ways that you would like to see me or NOAA in general engaging with you, the community, industry, please do let me know, because we want to be there, we want to support, and we want to make sure that this is equitable. So thank you for having me again today, and I look forward to chatting with y'all again sometime soon.
All right, thanks so much, Tori, and thank you all. We'll see you next month, and I think there may be an opportunity to put some comments together for Tori as a collaborative. So we'll talk about doing that with our steering committee. All right, thank you all. Take care, and we'll see you next month. Aloha.
Bye.